So how's everybody feeling? I know it's kind of to that point in the semester where things are getting a little bit arduous. I know even in my own classes, I'm really tired, and I'm ready for things to be over with. So I understand, man. It's that Zoom fatigue is kicking in. So I get it. Believe you me, y'all not alone. Yeah,
Sitting in the same position every day is just really
hard.
exhausting.
Yeah, and so like what I do is I'll teach, and then maybe get an hour, and then I'm sitting in 3 hours of course lectures myself as a student, and then I might have a meeting where I have to sit on this. So I'm in here so much. It's just like it's really. But what are we gonna do, right? It's what I signed up for. But I hope you guys are excited and ready to engage in this conversation around Malcolm. I'm going to run through some of my notes. I'm really more excited to hear from you guys than to hear myself speak. But I do want to provide you guys some context of what he's getting at and see how that leads to a broader conversation. So we know the title of the speech is called The Ballot or the Bullet. We know this is one of his latter speeches. This is Malcolm post Nation of Islam. So that's why you hear a little bit more freedom in his speech, and I'll kind of get to some of the points when I mean his freedom in his speech. The speech was given in 1964, and I'll talk about how the foreshadowing of 1964 led to some events in 1965. One of the things that Malcolm places on the table is this notion of political accountability, right? So you could place these people in office, but how do you ensure that who you place in office are going to make good on the promises that they made to you to have you vote for them, right? So this is one of the things that's really on the table. He makes a claim that the Democrats and the Republicans are on two sides of the same coin, right? So we know in America we have a two-party system, one party being Democrat, one being Republican, and they're positioned as if they're at odds with one another. But Malcolm argues that, in fact, as it pertains to Black folks and their freedom, both the Democrats and the Republicans they work in the same fashion, right? Um, so when you think back to a few weeks ago when we talked about the Baldwin reading, and I said that there's two pillars of white inferiority for James Baldwin, one being the white imagination, the other being the maintenance of white innocence. There's also two pillars for Malcolm, and this is not in how he understands white supremacy, but this is just how Malcolm moves as a whole, right? This is just what kind of guides Malcolm, and one of them being truth, right? And you hear in the speech he says, "I'm going to give you the truth, whether you like it or not," right? And if you're familiar with Malcolm's life, if you tapped into his autobiography, or if you've even seen the movie that came out in '92 or '93, you see that once he's presented with new information, he takes in that information, he digests that information, and then he adapts his life to the new information that he received. So, for example, before he came into contact with the Nation of Islam, right? He was a hustler. He was in the streets. He was a pimp. He sold drugs, right? He got arrested, and then while in prison, he was confronted with the truth that is the Nation of Islam, and that changed his whole life, right? And he was dedicated to the mission of the Nation of Islam. Once he received some information about the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad in particular, who is the head of the Nation of Islam at the time, he shifts his life, separates himself from the Nation of Islam. He goes on his pilgrimage to Mecca, right? And he finds out what Orthodox Islam is like, right? So he's forced to put down his understanding of Islam as it's been compartmentalized within the Nation of Islam and take up this notion of the Orthodox version of Islam. So again, once he's confronted with these new truths, he adapts his life and changes to those new truths. So this is why I say that's one of the guideposts. That's one of the pillars of Malcolm X is this notion of truth. And I'll get to the other one towards the end of my speech. Um, he has this collective notion of freedom, right? So I'm not worried about Malcolm X being liberated and free. I'm not worried about Africans in the United States being free. I want everyone to be free, right? So this is a collective notion, and this is a theme that we dealt with throughout the semester, right? The people who we've studied, they're not really interested in individual achievement, but collective achievement. Um, there's this notion of an apocalyptic prophecy, What do you guys think I mean when I say an apocalyptic prophecy in the speech? What does that mean? And if it's too,
Foretelling of something bad that is going to happen at the end.
absolutely. So, what do you guys think? So, and Francisco hit it right on the head, right? It's a foretelling of something that's gonna something bad, a doom to come, right? So, if you think about the speech and his argument in the speech, what is the prophecy that he's foretelling? Did anybody can anybody pick up on that? It's in the title of the speech. So we have the ballot or the bullet, right? So essentially, what he's arguing is if America does not allow African people within America to express their grievances by legitimate means, i.e., the vote, right? And then allowing their vote to actually translate into a material conditioning, to a shift in your material conditions, then there's going to be the bullet or there's going to be violence, right? So this is this prophecy that he's talking about. He says that a racial powder keg is more dangerous than an atomic powder keg, and he's talking about the atomic bomb being dropped, right? So he says it's more dangerous to have this racial situation sitting on the hands of the United States. It's more dangerous than the atomic bomb, right? So this is that prophecy that's fatalistic, right? That he's talking about. Um, he said, and then he also comes so there's this idea that he's very much centering that we're going to put all these other identities aside that may cause distractions, right? So we're not going to talk about your religion, right? I'm a Muslim, but I'm gonna leave my religion at home. I'm gonna leave my religion in the closet, right? Because right now we need to organize and unify as Black folks, right? So he's compartmentalizing identities around the political objective of Black nationalism, okay? And and he does this also in his organizational efforts. So mind you, I said this is Malcolm after the Nation of Islam. He has started the Organization of Afro American Unity, and he also started Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And if you think about it, that's separating the religious, right? Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and then the Black nationalist approach with Afro American, the Organization for Afro American Unity, right? So not only in his speech is he saying this, but in his practice, in the way that he goes about his organizing, he's doing this work also by having the two separate. He talks about all the Christian preachers who are Christian preachers, but are also engaged in the civil rights struggle, right? So while they are even leaving their religion at home in a sense and taking up the call for civil rights. Um, and then you also begin to see Malcolm's international analysis and his international critique because he starts naming off all of the global movements that undermined or overthrew colonialism, right? He talks about Vietnam and the rice farmers being able to overthrow the United States, right? He talks about the Kenya and the Mau Mau in Kenya, all the decolonial movements that are taking place throughout Africa, right? So he's saying like all the people of culture throughout the world are beginning to overthrow their colonial masters. So you see an international analysis come through from Malcolm. Um, he talks about very, very succinctly, very plainly, and very bluntly, right? The government has failed you. Anytime that you're walking around in 1964 singing "We Shall Overcome," the government has failed you, right? Anytime there's any filibustering or what he calls any dilly daddling, right? That's the government, and they're the ones who have failed you. And then to me, this is one of the most brilliant things about Malcolm, I think probably the most tragic thing about his life being cut short, right? He's shifting this notion of struggling for civil rights. And if you think about the 60s, and if you think about the past and the way that activism is talked about in our country, we're always using this frame civil rights. Well, the civil rights movement did it this way, right? Malcolm is saying, no, we have a human rights issue on our hands, okay? So if we think about not the organization, not the movement, but the term, right? The term Black Lives Matter. What is that saying? What does that term invoke? What does that term mean? Black Lives Matter. What does it mean? Black Lives Matter.
It
I
has
mean,
value.
Daniel, what has value?
Black
specifically black
lives.
people.
Exactly. Right. So stick with me here. I'm gonna try to and let me know if I'm not being clear. So this term is centering the value, the importance, right, the validity of Black life. Okay. Now, civil rights are where can you eat, where can you go to school, where can you buy a home, right? That's your civil rights. That's how you're able to exist within society, within civilization, right? It's the civil rights. Black Lives Matter is a human rights claim because it's not where black folks can eat matters. It's not where black folks can live matter. Not where black folks go to school that matters, right? It's about the black folks' ability to live is what matters. So that right there, even in the terminology of Black Lives Matter, they're talking about a human rights issue, right? So what Malcolm was trying to do before he was stolen from this earth was take the issues of black folks to the United Nations and present them not as civil rights issues, but as human rights violation, right? So America is engaging in human rights violations against black folks within the United States. And he brings up the example of Jews in Germany, right? The Jews were effectively able to take their plight to the United Nations and get aid for the genocide that the Germans were trying to effect on them, right? So he says, how is it that 22 million black victims of America cannot take their plight to the United Nations as a human rights issue as well, right? And to me, one of the missteps, not only of Black Lives Matter, the movement and the organization, but really all organizations that advocate for black folks and people oppressed throughout the United States, one of the missteps that they're doing is they're fighting human rights issues at the civil rights level. Does that make sense? I'm gonna say it one more time. So a lot of organizations, really, before Malcolm X and after Malcolm X, they're taking up a human rights issue, the ability to live as black folks, and they're fighting these issues at the civil rights level, right? And to kind of
Professor, can you like elaborate a little
yeah,
bit?
absolutely. So one of the things that Malcolm says is you can't take the criminal to the criminal's court, right? He says that in the speech. I'm gonna try to connect these two realities. So and I'll try to tie it to our time as well, to our now as well. Derek Chauvin was the 8th officer since 2005 convicted of killing unarmed people, right? So since 2005 till now, and I think we may have talked about this before, there's been at least 1,000 deaths per year, right? So that's a vastly disproportionate number. So this is what Malcolm is saying when he's saying you're taking the criminal to their court, right? The judge and the judge and the police force, they work hand in hand, according to Malcolm, right? So you're not going to find any justice taking these people to the very same courts who they work for, right? You're not going to. That would be the equivalent of my son doing something to you, and you coming to me and be like, yo, your son did a wrong to me. I'm going to take the side of my son, right? That's just the way that things work. So our court system, our legal system, it works in the same fashion. So what he's critiquing is every time that these things happen, you're looking for justice through this court system that's not going to afford you justice because they're working with the same police force that's killing you, right? So you're trying to take these human rights issues and fight them at the civil rights level, right? So what he's instead, what you should be doing is saying not these individual instances, right? It's not just Breonna Taylor, then George Floyd, then whoever else is next, right? It's a collective thing. It's a systemic thing. So take this as a whole issue to the United Nations or to the World Court and say that African people within the United States are being persecuted because of their epidermis, because of the color of their skin, and that is a human rights violation as it's chartered by the United Nations, right? So in a sense, you're wasting your time by trying to seek justice in these courts that do not afford you justice. It's a court system that's predicated on black folks being put in jail, right? The whole prison industrial complex cannot work without the courts. The judge has to send these people to prison, right? The judge is the one who sets these astronomical bails that does not allow for people to be able to bail themselves out, right? So we cannot separate what goes on in the courts from what goes on in the prison industrial complex. Does that make sense? So that's what I mean when I say we're taking a human rights issue and we're fighting these human rights issues at the civil rights level. Furthermore, again, we're not going to get the justice that we're looking for because we're going to people who are predicated on having these bodies in these prisons to maintain their profit, right? We know that the prison system is a for-profit business. And again, one of the key components to this for-profit business are the judges and the judges that place them into these systems. Okay. So also we again talking about the truth of Malcolm, right? And talking about his evolution and talking about him being outside of the Nation of Islam. And I mentioned there's a freedom that kind of came with him existing outside the Nation of Islam. So one of the things that you see and you hear it in the speech, he says, I'm no longer going to talk bad against those who take up the strategy of integration. Who does not know what integration means? So everybody gets what integration is? Okay. Okay, so integration is the opposite of segregation, right? So segregation says black folks gotta live on this side of town, white folks gotta live on this side of town, right? So Malcolm was very much against this notion of integration. A lot of your civil rights organizing of the time was built on the idea that if we're able to integrate, we'll get the same type of treatment that white folks got, right? Which is a false notion because as we know now, right, in an integrated society, it's still not the same, right? And in fact, they say now the segregation in the United States in 2021 is in fact more segregated than it was in the 1960s. So even this idea of advocating for integration has not even been accomplished. But let's kind of sit with this for a moment. Why would y'all think that someone like Malcolm would be against this notion of integration? Because after all, right, even the Ku Klux Klan and the white and furious powers that be, they were for and they were advocating for this notion of segregation, right? So why would you think someone like Malcolm X, an organization like the Nation of Islam, would also echo the sentiments of integration, of segregation, trying to keep them separate? Why would that be beneficial? Think about what he says about black nationalism.
I think Malcolm actually think the Black community should be controlled and managed by the African American people, especially those facilities like supermarket and the living resource support needs to be managed by the African American people, which in the way that they can better plans the resource to support the Black community instead of managed by the white, because they are there only for profit. They're not really doing things for their community.
Yeah, absolutely, Cecilia. You hit the nail on the head. So think about this, right? Has anybody heard of in the 1920s? There was a community in Oklahoma called in Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Black Wall Street. Has anybody heard of that term? Okay. So Black Wall Street, again, is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My grandma is from that area. So I guess my great-grandmother was a member of this Black Wall Street. But, excuse me, very small town in Tulsa, strictly Black-owned town. Over 16 banks, over eight hospitals. These are Black-owned businesses, right? Pharmacies, restaurants, grocery stores, schools, right? This is an insulary Black thriving community, right? At the time, Oklahoma had 2 airports. the whole state of Oklahoma had 2 airports, right? Within Tulsa, Oklahoma, within Black Wall Street, there were 11 private jets. That's how much wealth that was moving through Black Wall Street, okay? So think about this. There's only 2 airports in the whole damn state, but in one community, there's 11 private jets. In 1920, right? So I don't know if y'all know how expensive it is to have a private jet. Just the gas alone is crazy, right? But 11 private jets. So what happens is under Malcolm's, and really exactly to the point that Cecilia is making, is because of them being forced to be separate, right? You have to do for yourself. If you don't have a hospital, you can't go to the white side of town, so you're not going to get any medical help. So you better build your own hospital, right? You don't have a school, can't go to the school on the white side of town, so you better make sure that your community has schools, right? So this notion of self-sufficiency is embedded in this idea of segregation, right? Because if you don't have, you better do for yourself because no one's doing for you, right? So now, if you look at the black dollar and the way that the black dollar circulates, right? They say it doesn't even stay within the black community more than 24 hours, right? So, and how I'll articulate what this means. So I get my paycheck, right? I have to go get groceries. I have to go do whatever I need to do to live. I'm not spending my money with black businesses. They're going outside of my community, right? So that's why they say it does not circulate more than 24 hours. But this is a byproduct of integration, right? Because when we were segregated, when you went to go get groceries, you went to the store on in your neighborhood, right? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because even if we look today, right? And I said earlier that they say statistically we're as just as even more segregated now than we were in the 1960s, okay? But think about this. If we go to Boyle Heights, right? How long do you think the indigenous dollar can circulate within Boyle Heights? A long time, right? I lived in Boyle Heights, and you could get everything that you need without having to leave Boyle Heights, right? They have things like Little Koreatown in LA, right? The dollar for that community could circulate quite a bit within that community, right? I know in northern Hollywood, like North Hollywood, like North Culver City, right? There's a very large Jewish community, right? And their dollar is able to circulate within their community for a very long time because they could spend it with their own, right? Even parts of Fairfax, which is considered Little Ethiopia, right? So if you're going north, on the left side of the street, you have Ethiopian centers, but on the right side of the street, you have Jewish centers, right? So even if we are to say in LA, there's like a black area, right? We would call it Little Ethiopia as far as ownership, but even on that block, it's blended with a very heavy Jewish influence, right? So now y'all might be thinking, well, what about places like Inglewood, right? What about places like South Central where there is a large population of black folks, right? But the key is in those areas, the businesses by and large aren't ran by black folks. So even when you go to the corner store in Inglewood, it's not a black person owning that corner store. So when you spend your money, that dollar is going outside of your community, right? So this kind of gets back to this idea or this notion of black nationalism, making sure that your politics places your blackness at the forefront, making sure that your economic spending habits places your blackness at the forefront, right? Making sure that if you are going to schools, right, you're going to go to schools that are ran and operated by black folks, right? In the 90s, they off of Slauson, a little bit east of Crenshaw, they had like the Marcus Garvey schools. They had the Marcus Garvey Junior High School and the Marcus Garvey Elementary School. These are like black owned and black ran schools. I think the elementary school is still there, but I don't know about the junior high school, right? So this idea of black nationalism is really something that Malcolm is picking up, and from a variety of standpoints, from political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, right? And then also to end it, he ends his speech with a notion of Pan-Africanism. And he says this in the sense that, I'm going to Africa. and I forget who he mentions. He said the United States sent somebody to Africa a little while ago, and they talked about um, how harmonious the relationship between Black folks in America are in the United States, right? And this was a very big thing that was going on at the time. They would send these representatives, these Black folks, to Africa and talk about how, what you read in the paper about the racial issues in the United States is not true. We're treated well, right? And then you'll point to like your celebrities. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, right? Joe Louis is the world champion, as examples to explain how the racial climate in the United States is good, right? But Malcolm was like, nah, I know that's not the case. So once I'm done with this speech, I'm hopping on a plane and I'm going back to Africa to let our brothers and sisters out there know what the plight of the Black man in the United States truly is, right? And if you read his autobiography, especially towards the end of the autobiography, he's really about that mission. And even through the language barrier of him not being able to speak the languages, he finds ways to communicate this notion of what Black folk experience here in the United States, right? And my final thing, because I mentioned how his apocalyptic prophecy of 1964 plays out in 1965. That next year, they call it the Red Summer of 1965, because throughout the United States, all urban areas, Los Angeles, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York, they burned with urban rebellions because the racial climate was not addressed, right? The ballot or the bullet, they did not allow for the ballot to be atoned. So the bullet was picked up, and all major cities in urban areas had rebellions, right? And cities burned. Just like, thinking back to the 1992, the Rodney King situation, how the cities kind of were caught, lit on fire. The same thing played out in 1965, except it was not located just to South Central LA. This was happening all over the United States in all major urban areas. And to me, this is a direct foreshadow. What Malcolm was saying in his speech in 1964 was a foreshadowing of the events that would take place the summer a year later. Okay, I'll put my piece on pause. If you have not fishbowled, you should definitely go now, because I think we only have one more week of class that we'll be meeting to have the opportunity to fishbowl. What I will do, because I don't have it with me off top, but when we meet next week, I'll have a list of who's fishbowl, if you went once, if you went twice, and what have you. Realistically, that's not my responsibility, that's y'all. So, if you don't think you fishbowl, you should definitely volunteer today. Does anybody want to volunteer?
Right here.
Okay, Brandon. I'm sorry, who else was that?
Armina.
Armina, okay. Thank you, Armina. And anybody else? I think everybody else is good. I know, I want to say Francisco, you went twice. I know Cecilia, you went twice. And Ashley, I believe you went twice as well. I think Daniel, you're good. This is just off the top. I don't know for sure. Juan, I don't know how many you have, bro. Yuki, I'm not sure with you either. Ansley, I know you have at least one, Ansley. But I don't know if you have your second one or not.
I've gone twice.
Twice, okay.
I went twice too.
I've gone twice, but if you
okay.
need,
No, if you
need
got,
someone to share.
if y'all went twice, don't. I mean, if you did your task, so you good.
We went it 3 times, but if you don't have enough people, I can do it today.
No, I mean we could go with these two. I just want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to fishbowl, so you get your full participation points.
Okay.
It sounds like then everybody else has went, so we'll go with Brandon and Armina. So it's on you guys. Whoever wants to start it off.
I'll go. I found this reading very interesting. Something like I mainly understood was that he wanted people to stop comparing themselves and stop finding differences in different cultures and races. Instead, he wanted them to realize what the issue was. And I noticed that he said that Black people are victims of not being accepted in America. Therefore, they couldn't be considered as Americans. I liked hearing the speech and also reading it. I found a big difference because in hearing it, you could hear his voice and how he really feels about what he's saying. It was showing how he was passionate in what he was saying, and in a way he was angry.
Yeah.
All right, my turn. Uh, as I was reading, I found the speech like sort of, like in the reading, you use your own head, you voice it out yourself. But as I read the reading and tried to listen along with the video, I would hear the crowd's reaction, black people's reaction to what he said and what they felt what he said was correct, like they were being exploited, the government was oppressing them. They would be like, yeah, he's right. They're cheering for him, uh, clapping, some lines it was like funny jokes here and there. And they laughed as well. He made the atmosphere in that room or wherever he was giving that speech very emotional. He brought together all these black people. They all have the same philosophy, somewhat connecting them to one another. And he would, just go on and bring out more topics and points on how, white people are just taking advantage of them in America, where, that America was built from them, basically. Uh, he talked about the economical struggles that black people had due to the white or the man, implying white people taking advantage of them. He then spoke about how he wasn't a politician, right? He wasn't a Democrat nor a Republican, but he didn't see himself as an American. But people who were American technically weren't considered American either, implying what you said before. Black people, they struggled a lot, but he said that any other white race that came to America instantly would be perceived as American, while black people who have been there for years, decades, centuries, they weren't considered American at all. They were just black people. Uh, he spoke about how there were movements during the time of when he was alive, but they were singing, chanting. They weren't going to really get anything done, with just singing and chanting. He wanted actual actions. He actually wanted things to be done. That was what he perceived as black nationalism. And yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, I think both of you guys really touched on some very fecund points. Armenia, she brought up you can hear the passion in his voice and then the anger also, but a justifiable anger too, right? If you're talking about 4 little girls getting bombed in a church, that's going to cause you to be angry, right? But then Brandon, talking about the crowd, and to me, that's something that I was very attentive to also was the crowd. There's this idea of call and response. And I don't know if anybody been to a black church, but if you've been to a black church, you know what I'm talking about, right? And you hear it in the speech as well. Like the preacher will say something, and you'll hear the all right, the right arms preacher, the amens preacher, right? Like it's this idea that the speaker knows that he or she is being listened to by the way that the crowd responds, right? If you think about hip hop and you think about the DJ is predicated on this notion of call and response, right? Have y'all ever been to a concert and then the DJ drops the beat out or the artist stops singing and puts the mic to the crowd and expects y'all to sing, right? That's this notion of call and response, right? It's an engagement. From a pedagogical standpoint, right? I'm very much dependent on call and response. That's why I asked you guys to open up your cameras, because even if you don't say nothing, I can see that you nod your head and I know that we're connected, right? So this need for connection when there's engagement between a presenter and the audience, right? So this is this notion of call and response. And another thing that Brandon said that I don't think Malcolm gets a lot of credit for is his humor, right? And he's seen as this very serious, cumbersome stoic individual, which is not true, right? But at the same time, he's very humorous, and you can hear how the crowd responds to his jokes, right? Tricky Dicky, right? Like the way he could play with words, you know, and it speaks to also his spatiality, where he's located, right? He's based out of Harlem, New York. The speech was given in Detroit, but he's a byproduct of the North, right? So this is a drastic juxtaposition to what's going on in the South, where you have like the likes of Martin Luther King, who was like a Baptist minister, so it's a very much more of a slow play style, right? It's more biblical, it's more metaphorical. Where Malcolm, I'm just gonna shoot from the hip. I'm gonna tell it like it is, right? I'm gonna be very blunt. I don't have to, not to say not be eloquent, but I don't have to sugarcoat my message, right? I can give it to you the way that you need it and you understand and respond to it. Very good job, you guys, on the fishbowl. We have a few more minutes. I want to hear a couple more people's ideas on their distinctions between hearing the speech, reading the speech, and then also this idea of Black nationalism. And the reason I ask that is because typically when you hear nationalism, it has like a negative connotation. But the way that Malcolm is using it in this context, as if it's something that should be positive. So I'm curious to know what you guys thought about that, and then also the distinction you guys found between hearing the speech and reading the speech.
When he says nationalism, right?
Mhm.
He brought up nationalism in Asia and in Africa as well.
Mhm.
You know, nationalism over there brought people their independence
Right.
from colonialism or like any other, you know, struggle they had, and they brought together the people, and it formed a great, or you know, it formed countries, cities, communities, and he thought nationalism was a good term to use,
Yeah.
I guess, in this uh, issue.
Yeah. Was anybody kind of like taken back by the term by when you first heard Black nationalism? Kind of like, oh, like what the fuck is that, or that's problematic? Anybody have like a negative initial response to hearing that? No. Okay. And this is about my fourth time teaching this particular speech, and it's always something that I have to kind of like tease out. So I'm glad that you guys were able to process it without having that negative reaction.
Can I mention one more thing? Because I notioned that he said that Black nationalists believe that African Americans should control the politics and economies in their communities, and also they need to remove the vices such as alcoholism and drug addictions, because those are things that really affected their communities. I think African American people, by doing that, they really have some people care about their community, right? Not their for profit, or only for their for profit. So they need to provide a good education to their kids and also remove all those bad things out of their community. I think that's really important.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of things I can personally, just because of my study and my research, can critique the Nation of Islam on, right? But one thing that you cannot critique the Nation of Islam on is their ability to transform the downtrodden, right? So as I mentioned to start off the lecture, Malcolm was a pimp, Malcolm was a hustler, right? Malcolm was a drug addict. He was addicted to cocaine, right? But through the Nation of Islam, he was able to shake that habit. And one of the things that really, really made Malcolm popular, especially in New York, is once he became clean, he went right back in those same areas that he was known as Detroit Red, right? And he started converting the drug addicts. He started converting the prostitutes. He started converting the hustlers and getting them down with the Nation of Islam. So far as a transformative force, there really could be no force greater than the Nation of Islam, just to call it like it is, right? They do even to this day, they have one of the strongest prison presence as far as converting people who have been formerly incarcerated and then bringing them out and giving them a focus to their life, the Nation of Islam. So you're absolutely right. I'll ask you guys this, and we'll end with this question. I don't know if you guys noticed, but throughout this whole semester, I have never used the term African American. At best, I'll use the term African in America. Why do you think that is?
Uh, because African American is just American, though.
Right, right. So, and if we think about what Malcolm is saying, what is an African American, right? Like, and he uses this, and he uses this analogy, and I think it's a perfect way to describe the analogy, to describe this situation. Everybody in this class, we're having a dinner, right? And there's this big table, everybody's sitting down at the table, and everybody's feasting, everybody's eating, right? I come to the table, I'm sitting at the table, but I don't get a plate, right? So yeah, I'm here with y'all, but I'm not doing the same thing that y'all doing. Y'all eating. I'm not. I'm watching y'all eat, right? This is the metaphor that he uses to explain the experience of Africans in America, right? We're here on this country, we're here on this land, but for us to vote, we got to struggle, fight, and die for it, right? For us to go to school, we got to struggle, fight, and die for it, right? For us to get housing, we have to struggle, fight, and die for it. So all of the benefits that America is affording its citizens, we don't get to reap those benefits, right? So we're not really included in this project of Americanism, right? And that's why he's saying I'm not an American, I'm a victim. I'm one of the 22 million victims of Americanism, right? Because if you're a part of that, if you're a citizen, you get all the rights that citizens deserve, right? We're dealing with the Constitution, and your job and your task is to rewrite the Constitution in a way that includes African people, right? That includes the marginalized, that includes the oppressed, right? So if you're not included, then how are you a citizen of that country, right? If you have to argue and fight to say that your life matters, what's your role in that country as an equal citizen, right? So I align myself with Malcolm's thinking on this. At best, I'm an African who's in America, right? Yeah, I'm on the land, but I'm not reaping the benefits. You know, I'm a stepchild, right? We say a second class citizen. Nah, you're not a second class citizen. You're colonized. What Malcolm will tell you, right? So I also think that for especially for Black folks, right? Like we're getting dangled this idea of inclusion to limit our abilities to see what our possibilities are, right? So just think for a minute if all Black folks, right, really thought about themselves as Africans in America. And they decided, you know what, fuck America, we're gonna just go back to Africa, right? What type of, in a true nationalist sense, right? How would that shift the way that America would be forced to relate to Black folks, right? Think about entertainment, right? Entertainment is America's biggest global export. You guys understand what I mean when I say that? Entertainment is America's biggest global export. So not coffee, not sugar, not clothing, right? Entertainment. So sports, music, acting, movies, things of that nature. By and large, when you talk about popular music, it's coming from Black folks. Let's call it what it is, right? When you talk about your most popular sports, especially in this country, basketball, football, right? LeBron James, right? Black dude, right?
Well, I have been
Right.
in Asia countries for so many times, and I know how people are crazy about the NBA and pop music culture, and how big Michael Jackson died. How
Yep.
many people are crying for that?
Yep.
And also Kobe Bryant. Oh my
Kobe
God,
Bryant. Yep.
we are crying, and the social media is all about that.
Yep.
I know that has a huge influence, and that is Americans' backbone. I feel that Black people are really contributed to the pop culture of this country.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So, and that's why, again, just to be critical, right? And to really think about this idea of who's American and who's included into this project, especially for us. We get included, when I say us Black folks, right? We get included when we can be exploited. And that's when you can become American. So when I need you to build America and you're enslaved, then you can be part of this project, right? But when you start talking about your freedom and your rights, I don't want to hear that shit, go back, right? But I need to be entertained, so you can come on and sing and dance and shoot this basketball for me. But when you start talking about your rights, shut up and dribble, right? So America wants to pick and choose when Black folks can be American, right? And one of our shortcomings is we keep falling into that trap of, oh, we're included now, right? Instead of just saying, listen, we got our own thing going and we're going to situate ourselves on that. Thank you guys. I thought today's class discussion was really robust, kind of picked up my energy because I'm kind of drained. So I appreciate you guys helping me get through this. I do want to throw out, we're going to pivot a little bit for next week. I had some readings that we're going to go through, but I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. We've been talking about a lot what's wrong, right? This whole semester has been dealing with this whole semester has been a critique, right? We've been critiquing the issues of Americanism, of patriotism, of westernization, imperialism, etc. And to me, that's important, right? But if you can't critique with with an understanding of what you're building towards, then you're not doing anything, right? And oftentimes what happens is for those revolutionaries, for those who seek to create deep systemic change, they often don't think about what they're building in spite of what they seek to tear down, right? So you could talk about abolishing the police all you want, but you better have an idea of what to put in the place of the police, right? So in lieu of that, we're going to read a short story by an artist named Octavia Butler. The story is called Book of Martha. Actually, I'll do this real quick. I'll just read a quick passage, and I'm going to post this on your Google Classroom, so that way you'll know what it is. Let's see. So just to give you a real quick premise, this is a conversation between Martha, who is the protagonist, and God, okay? Martha asked the question, "What do you want me to do?" He didn't answer at once. He looked at her with what she read as amusement, looked at her long enough to make her even more uncomfortable. "What do you want me to do?" she repeated, her voice stronger this time. "I have a great deal of work for you," he said. He said at last, "As I tell you about it, I want you to keep 3 people in mind: Jonah, Job, and Noah. Remember them. Be guided by their stories." So what God is asking her to do is to make one change in humanity, right? One change in humanity that's going to make humanity a better place. I'm not going to give up the whole story, but I want you to read this and think about your project, right? So I'm not God, and I'm not pretending to be, but I'm asking you to make a change in the Constitution that will make this society a better place, right? But I want you guys to read this with that same context in mind as you begin to cultivate and craft your project. Because what God tells her, be very meticulous in the change that you seek to make, because this change is going to have vast ramifications, right? So just think about this as you think about your project and you think about cultivating your project. And again, this is just a good exercise to think about not only the systems that we seek to tear down, that need to be teared down, but what systems do we seek to build up in its place? And to me, the project of building up is vastly more important than the project of tearing down. So this is not up on the Google Classroom yet. I'll post that sometime today, if not today, tomorrow. And then I'll also email this out to you guys no later than Friday, so that way you'll have that as well. So this will be our last class discussion before you guys present your projects the following week. Is there any other questions, comments, or concerns for me? No? All right. Well, you guys have a good week. If there's anything that comes up, just shoot me a line. I'll be happy to respond. Everybody did very well on your midterms and your journals. I enjoyed reading those and kind of getting some insight into how you guys have been processing the information. So congrats on that. All right. You guys have a good week. Have a